Margaret Sullivan, you're under arrest for practicing medicine without a license and reckless endangerment of a minor." Maggie felt the world tilt. After everything, after saving Emma, after fighting Thorne, after finally finding love, it was ending like this. In handcuffs. Accused of the one thing she'd spent 10 years hiding. Jake stepped between them, his voice deadly quiet. "Over my dead body." But Maggie knew the truth. Sometimes doing the right thing meant losing everything. 3 months earlier, none of this seemed possible. 3 months earlier, she was just a fat widow selling pies in a dusty market square, invisible to everyone except the man who would change her life forever. The pie hit the dirt before the laughter started. Margaret Sullivan didn't flinch. She just knelt there in the dust of Silver Creek's Saturday market, her worn calico dress spreading around her like a puddle, and began gathering the pieces. Crust fragments, sticky apple filling. The tin plate bent where it had struck a rock. Her hands moved with the same careful precision she used for everything. Methodical, unhurried, as if public humiliation were just another chore to be endured. The church ladies circled like vultures. They wore their Sunday best even though it was Saturday, their skirts rustling with righteous indignation, their faces painted with that particular expression women wear when they found someone to look down on. Constance Whitmore led the pack naturally. She always did. Tall and thin as a whip with iron gray hair pulled so tight it looked painful, she had the kind of face that seemed designed for disapproval. "Oh dear," Constance said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "What a terrible accident." It wasn't an accident. Everyone knew it. A young woman, likely hired by Constance, had knocked the pie from Maggie's display table with a theatrical gasp and an apology so insincere it barely qualified as words. But that's how these things worked in Silver Creek, Wyoming territory in the year of our Lord, 1879. You could destroy someone's livelihood as long as you said sorry afterward. Maggie kept her eyes down, kept collecting the pieces. Her face burned, but her hands stayed steady. 3 years of this. 3 years since Thomas died. 3 years since the baby. 3 years of being the town's favorite cautionary tale. See what happens when a woman lets herself go. See what comes of eating your grief instead of praying it away. See how God punishes the weak. She'd heard it all, in whispers behind her back, in sermons that never quite said her name but somehow everyone knew meant her. In the way mothers pulled their children aside when she walked past, as if extra weight were somehow contagious. As if loss were something you could catch like influenza. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. The worst part was that some small poisoned corner of her mind believed them. 20 feet away, hidden in the shadow of the blacksmith's forge, Jacob Brennan watched. He'd been watching for almost an hour now, though he couldn't have said exactly why. He'd come to town for supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, the basics that kept a ranch running through autumn. He'd planned to load up the wagon and head back before the afternoon heat set in. But then he'd seen her, the fat woman with the sad eyes and the unsold pies. That's what most people saw when they looked at Margaret Sullivan. But Jake had spent 8 years watching his daughter grow up motherless, and 8 months watching her fade into silence. He'd spent 8 months watching his daughter fade into silence after a horse threw her and shattered her spine. He knew what real suffering looked like, and he knew the difference between someone who'd given up and someone who refused to break. This woman was the latter. She knelt in the dirt with half the town's so-called decent folk laughing at her, and her back stayed straight, her chin stayed up. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't make herself smaller to appease them. She just gathered her ruined pie with the kind of dignity that made Jake think of soldiers he'd known during the war. Men who'd taken bullets and kept walking because falling down wasn't an option. He'd seen plenty of people break under pressure. This woman didn't, and that made him curious. Constance Whitmore's voice cut through the morning air like a blade through butter. "Margaret, dear, perhaps this is a sign, a reminder that you should consider eating less of your own inventory." The gathered crowd tittered, not loud, vicious laughter. That would have been too honest. Instead, it was the polite, poisonous laughter of people who wanted to hurt someone but also wanted to maintain their reputations as good Christians. the kind of laughter that left no marks but somehow damaged deeper than fists. Maggie stood, slowly. Her knees protested. Everything protested these days. She was 34 years old, and her body felt 50. But she stood anyway, holding the bent tin plate and its ruined contents, and looked Constance Whitmore directly in the eyes. "My weight," she said, and her voice carried that same quiet steadiness Jake had noticed in her posture, "is none of your business, Constance. But since you've made it yours, I'll tell you what is my business, making food that actually tastes good." Someone in the crowd made a small sound, half gasp, half laugh. Maggie pressed on. "Maybe that's why your husband always stops by my table when you're not looking. He bought 3 of my apple pies last month. Said they reminded him of his mother's cooking." Constance's face went pale, then red, then a shade of purple that suggested imminent apoplexy. The crowd had gone silent now, genuinely silent, because in the carefully maintained hierarchy of Silver Creek, you didn't talk back to Constance Whitmore. You certainly didn't mention her husband's private purchases or imply that her own cooking fell short. Jake found himself smiling, just slightly, just enough that the scar on his left cheek pulled tight. The smile died when Gerald Thorne stepped into the square. If Constance Whitmore was the moral authority of Silver Creek, Gerald Thorne was its actual power. He owned the bank, the general store, half the buildings on Main Street, and most of the debts that kept the other half standing. He was a big man, not tall, but wide, with a body that suggested too much good food and too little hard work. His suit cost more than most families made in a year. His shoes had probably never touched actual dirt. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, and his voice had that particular smoothness that powerful men cultivate like oil on water. "I'm afraid we have a small matter to discuss." Maggie's shoulders tensed. Jake saw it from across the square, saw the way her hands tightened on the pie plate, saw the way her jaw set. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "can it wait? I'm trying to clean up." "I'm afraid not." Thorne pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "You see, you're behind on your property tax. 3 months behind to be precise. Unless you pay $200 by the end of this month, we'll have to seize your home." The crowd had been enjoying the Constance confrontation. This was different. This was business. This was the way Silver Creek actually worked beneath all the church socials and polite manners. This was power being exercised on someone who had none. Maggie's voice stayed level. "I have until the end of the month." "Technically, yes." Thorne's smile was sympathetic in the way a snake's smile would be sympathetic. "But we both know you can't make $200 selling pies, Margaret. Perhaps it's time to consider other arrangements." Other arrangements. Everyone knew what that meant. Sell the house and the small plot of land for a fraction of its worth. Move into one of Thorne's tenement buildings and pay rent for a room the size of a closet. Become dependent. Become owned. "I'll find a way," Maggie said. "Of course you will, dear." Thorne patted her shoulder. Actually patted her like she was a dog. "I'm sure you'll do your best." He turned to walk away, clearly considering the matter settled. That's when Jake stepped forward. "How much for all 6 pies?" His voice carried across the square. Deep, rough. The kind of voice that came from years of shouting over wind and cattle and the general chaos of ranch life. Every head turned. Even Thorne stopped mid-stride. Jake walked through the crowd like Moses through the Red Sea. They parted for him. They always did. He was Jacob Brennan, owner of the largest spread in the county, employer of 20 men, veteran of the war between the states with the scars to prove it. More importantly, he was a man who paid his debts and kept his word, and in a place like Silver Creek that made him something approaching royalty. He stopped in front of Maggie's table. 5 pies remained. Apple, cherry, peach, a custard, and something that smelled like cinnamon in autumn. The 6th pie was still scattered in the dirt. I said how much for all 6, including the one on the ground. Maggie stared at him. Up close, Jake could see the lines around her eyes. Worry lines, grief lines, the kind that came from crying alone where no one could see. Her eyes were blue, Not sky blue, ocean blue, the kind of blue that looked different depending on the light. "The one on the ground is ruined," she said. "I'll manage. How much?" "That would be $15, Mr. Brennan, but I can't let you pay for something that's been destroyed. Seems to me you made that pie. Seems to me your work has value regardless of whether it ended up on the ground. 15 for 5 pies is $3 apiece. I'm guessing the ruined one was worth the same, so that's $18 total." He pulled out his wallet, counted out bills, put them on the table in front of her. "Actually, let's call it 30. Quality costs." Maggie looked at the money like it was a snake. "That's too much." "My money. My choice." "Why are you doing this?" Jake picked up one of the pies. Apple. The crust was perfect. Golden brown with a lattice top that showed the care that had gone into it. This wasn't the work of someone just going through the motions. This was craftsmanship. "Because I don't like bullies," he said loud enough for Constance to hear. "And I don't like Thorne." Gerald Thorne had been watching this exchange with increasing displeasure. Now he stepped closer, his smile gone, replaced by something harder. "Jacob, you're wasting your money on charity cases." Jake turned, slowly. He had 4 inches and 30 pounds on Thorne, most of it muscle from a lifetime of ranch work. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "My money, my choice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ranch to run." He gathered the pies, all 6 of them, stacked them carefully in his arms. The ruined one he left on the table along with the money. Then he leaned in close to Maggie, close enough that only she could hear, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. "You're a fighter. I respect that. If you ever need work, I've got a ranch that could use someone who doesn't quit." She stared at him. "Work? What kind of work?" "The kind that pays. Think about it." He walked away, carried the pies to his wagon, loaded them carefully. The crowd watched in silence. This wasn't the entertainment they'd expected. This was something else. Something that made them uncomfortable because it disrupted the natural order. Gerald Thorne wasn't supposed to be challenged. Constance Whitmore wasn't supposed to be defied. And fat widows who made pies weren't supposed to be treated with respect. But Jake had just broken all 3 rules in under 5 minutes. As he climbed into his wagon, he heard wheels on packed dirt. Turned to see Sam Tucker pushing Emma through the square in her chair. Sam was 60 if he was a day weathered brown by sun and wind, with a gray beard and only one arm, the left one. He'd lost the right at Antietam, same battle where Jake had taken the scar to his face. They'd served in different units but ended up in the same field hospital, and when Jake came home to Wyoming and started buying land, Sam had shown up looking for work. That was 15 years ago. Now he was foreman friend and the closest thing to family Jake had besides Emma. Emma, 8 years old, dark hair like her mother, her father's gray eyes, and legs that hadn't worked properly since a spooked Mustang threw her 8 months ago. The doctors said she'd never walk again, said the spine was too damaged, said Jake should accept it and move on. Jake hadn't accepted a damn thing. She sat in the wheeled chair. Sam had built a blanket over her lap even though the morning was warm. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at anything really, just stared at her hands folded in her lap with an expression that made Jake's chest hurt every time he saw it. She'd been such a happy child before, loud, curious, running everywhere, climbing everything, laughing at nothing and everything. Now she was silent, had been since the accident. The doctors said there was nothing physically wrong with her voice. The silence was something else, something inside that had broken along with her legs. The chair rolled past Maggie's table. Emma's head came up, just slightly, just enough to look at the woman gathering the last pieces of ruined pie from the dirt. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Emma's eyes. Not recognition exactly, something else, something that might have been interest, or hope, or just awareness that here was another person the world had decided to overlook. Maggie met the child's gaze, held it, didn't smile that bright false smile adults always gave to damaged children, didn't look away in pity or discomfort, just looked, just acknowledged. Then Sam wheeled Emma past, and the moment broke. Jake watched his daughter's head turn, tracking Maggie even as the chair moved away. Something stirred in his chest. An idea. Probably a stupid idea, definitely a desperate one. But desperate was where he lived these days. He climbed into his wagon and drove away, the pies stacked carefully on the seat beside him. Behind him, the crowd slowly dispersed. The show was over. There were chores to do and gossip to spread and lives to live. Only Maggie remained kneeling again, finishing her cleanup with that same methodical care. Constance Whitmore stood on the general store porch watching. Her face was unreadable. After a long moment, she turned and walked away, her skirt snapping with each step. Gerald Thorne remained. He stood beside Maggie's empty table, his eyes following Jake's wagon until it disappeared around the bend toward the Brennan Ranch. $200, he said quietly. End of the month. Then he too was gone. Maggie finished gathering the pieces, every last one. She wrapped them carefully in brown paper. Waste, not want, not. She could salvage some of the filling, maybe use the crust pieces for something else. 3 years of poverty had taught her that nothing was truly ruined as long as you were creative enough. She counted the money Jake had left. $30. More than she'd made in the last 3 months combined. It was something. Not enough, but something. The morning sun climbed higher. The shadows shortened. The market day continued around her, but she felt separate from it now, like she was watching herself from a distance. A fat woman in a dusty dress holding $30 and the ruins of a pie, trying to decide what happened next. Work, Jake Brennan had said, at his ranch. Everyone knew the Brennan Ranch. 2,000 acres of good grazing land, 500 head of cattle. The kind of operation that employed 20 men and made enough money to weather droughts and hard winters. Jake Brennan was one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory, even if he didn't act like it. Women had been trying to catch his attention for 4 years, ever since Rebecca died, and he'd just publicly defended a fat widow nobody wanted. Maggie knew what the town would say, was already saying probably, that she'd trapped him somehow, used sympathy or manipulation or feminine wiles, despite the fact that there was nothing particularly feminine or wily about 220 pounds in a homespun dress, that she was a scheming woman looking to improve her station by latching onto a rich rancher. But she needed the money, needed it desperately. $200 by the end of the month, or she'd lose everything. The house, the land, the small piece of independence she'd fought so hard to maintain after Thomas died. She could sell pies, make $30 a month if she was lucky. That left $170 to find in 3 weeks. Or she could take the job, if it was even a real offer. If Jake Brennan hadn't just been making a grand gesture to spite Gerald Thorne. If he actually needed a cook or a housekeeper or whatever kind of work he'd been implying. Maggie folded the money carefully, put it in her dress pocket, picked up her basket and the empty pie tins, started the long walk home through streets that felt different now, still hostile, still judging, but maybe, just maybe, with a sliver of possibility that hadn't existed an hour ago. 3 miles outside town, in a ranch house that was too big and too empty, Jake Brennan sat at his desk and stared at the ledger in front of him. The numbers weren't good, weren't bad either, but weren't good. He had 60 days to pay Gerald Thorne $5,000 or lose the ranch, not lose it outright. Thorne didn't work that way. The bank would foreclose, conduct an auction, and somehow Thorne would end up owning the property for a fraction of its value. It was a game Jake had seen played a dozen times in the 10 years since Thorne bought the Silver Creek Bank. The loan had seemed reasonable when Jake took it out 5 years ago. Buy more land, expand the herd, increase profits. Rebecca had just given birth to Emma. The future looked bright. Then Rebecca died, giving birth to Emma. There had been complications. By the time Jake got back from the cattle drive, his wife was already buried and his newborn daughter was 3 days old, being cared for by the midwife. Then the drought hit. Then cattle prices dropped. Then Emma's accident. Now here he sat looking at numbers that didn't add up and a deadline that was approaching like a runaway train. He could sell cattle, take a loss but make the payment, survive to fight another day. Or he could find out why Gerald Thorne was so damn eager to own this particular piece of land. The ranch was good but not great. The grazing was decent. The water was reliable. The location was convenient to Silver Creek, but there were better spreads in the county. Bigger herds, more profitable operations. Why this one? Why now? And why was Thorne willing to push so hard when pushing hard might backfire? Jake stood, walked to the window. Outside his men were working, fixing fence, moving cattle, the same daily rhythm that had continued for years. Sam Tucker shouted something, and two of the younger hands laughed. Beyond them, near the main house, he could see Emma's chair parked by the garden. She sat motionless. Just sat. She did that a lot now. Sat and stared and said nothing. The doctors had been clear. The physical damage was permanent. The silence was something else. Grief, maybe. Or trauma. The child had watched her mother die after all. Watched Jake teach her to ride, push her too hard, demand too much. Watched the Mustang throw her. Watched her legs stop working. She blamed him. He knew that. Saw it in the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. The way she pulled away when he tried to touch her. The way she'd stopped speaking entirely, as if words were pointless when directed at the man who'd destroyed her life. He'd tried everything. 3 doctors. One said time would heal. One said she'd never walk again, accept it, and move on. One said he should send her to a special hospital back east where they had equipment and training for these kinds of injuries. Jake didn't have money for a special hospital, barely had money to keep the ranch, which brought him back to the fat widow with the sad eyes and the straight spine. Work, he'd said, but what he'd actually been thinking was help, because in that moment, watching Margaret Sullivan stand up to Constance Whitmore with the same stubborn dignity Emma used to have, he'd seen something, a possibility, a thread to pull. The woman was a fighter. Anyone could see that. But there was something else, something in the way she'd looked at Emma. No pity, no discomfort, just acknowledgement, as if she understood what it meant to be looked at like you were broken. It was a crazy idea, probably. But Jake was out of not crazy ideas. He left the office, walked to the kitchen. Sam was there making coffee. Actually making coffee. The man could do more with one arm than most men could do with 2. "Boss," Sam said, "about those pies. You planning to eat all 6 yourself, or are you sharing? Thought we'd have them with dinner." "All 6. Why not? They're good. Better than anything we've been making." "That's not saying much. My cooking tastes like boot leather, and yours ain't much better." Sam poured 2 cups, handed one to Jake. "So you gonna tell me what that was about in town? Or am I supposed to pretend you normally spend $30 on pies?" Jake sipped the coffee. Bitter. Strong. Exactly right. "Just didn't like watching them tear her apart for entertainment." "Uh-huh." Sam's one eye, the left one, the one that could still see clearly after 40 years of sun and wind, studied Jake with uncomfortable accuracy. "And it's got nothing to do with the fact that she looked at Emma like she mattered." "Don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't. Just like you don't know that you've been staring at Emma's chair for the last hour trying to figure out how to fix something that maybe can't be fixed." Jake set down his cup. "She's my daughter, Sam. I have to try." "Nobody's saying you don't. But hiring a fat widow to be a cook when we got a perfectly functional cookhouse isn't trying to fix Emma. That's trying to fix something else." "I haven't hired anyone yet." "But you're thinking about it." Jake didn't answer. Didn't need to. Sam knew him too well. 15 years of working together. 5 years before that of surviving a war that tried its best to kill them both. Some things didn't need saying. "The men won't care," Sam continued. "They'll eat anything as long as it's hot. But the town's going to have opinions. The town always has opinions. Thorne's going to make trouble. Thorne's already making trouble." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think she can help Emma?" "I don't know, but I know doing nothing isn't working." They drank their coffee in silence. Through the window, Jake could see Emma, still sitting, still staring, still silent. That night, Maggie Sullivan lay in her narrow bed in her small house and tried to decide whether desperation outweighed pride. The house was one room, bedroom, kitchen, everything in one space. It wasn't much, but it was hers, had been hers and Thomas's. The place where they'd started their marriage. The place where he'd died coughing up blood while she held him and felt completely useless. The place where she'd given birth alone except for a midwife who'd looked at Maggie's body with disgust and said the baby was dead before it even started. "Too much weight," the midwife had said. "You crushed her. This is God's judgment." Maggie knew that wasn't true, knew it intellectually anyway. Stillbirths happened. Something went wrong in the womb, some twist of fate or biology. It wasn't anyone's fault. Certainly wasn't divine punishment for the sin of eating too much, but knowing something and believing it were different things. She'd gained the weight after Thomas died. Grief had no appetite, they said, but that was a lie. Grief had an enormous appetite. Grief swallowed everything, days and nights and hope and future. And when grief was done, swallowing those things, it demanded to be fed with something physical. Bread, stew, pie, anything to fill the hollow place where a husband used to be. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd gone from 150 pounds to 220. Her dresses didn't fit. Her body felt foreign. And the town which had tolerated her before now looked at her with that particular combination of pity and contempt reserved for people who'd let themselves go. But here's what the town didn't know, what nobody knew. During the war, Maggie hadn't been making pies. She'd been making soldiers walk again. Army Hospital No. 12, Virginia, 1864 and 1865. Officially, she'd been a laundress. Women weren't allowed to practice medicine after all. But when you've got 100 wounded men and 3 overworked doctors, official rules become flexible. She'd learned to clean wounds, set bones, stitch flesh. And yes, help paralyzed men learn to walk again when the doctors said it was impossible. She'd been good at it. Really good. Good enough that the head surgeon, Dr. Morrison, started requesting her specifically for difficult cases. Good enough that she'd saved lives everyone else had written off. Until the incident with William Henderson. Private Henderson had taken a mini-ball to the leg, shattered the femur. By the time he reached the hospital, gangrene had set in. Maggie had seen it immediately, saw that without amputation the boy would die, told Dr. Morrison, told him 3 times. But Dr. Morrison was overwhelmed with other cases, and the commanding general had recently issued orders to stop amputating unless absolutely necessary because it was expensive and bad for morale. So Dr. Morrison told Maggie to wait. Check again in the morning, maybe the infection would improve. It didn't improve. William Henderson died 2 days later screaming while Maggie held his hand and felt rage build like steam in a covered pot. She'd found the commanding general, walked right into his office, told him his bureaucracy had killed a boy, used language that probably wasn't appropriate for a woman addressing an officer, got herself discharged for conduct unbecoming. They'd called it that because they couldn't fire her for being right. She'd come home to Wyoming territory, married Thomas, who didn't ask questions about her past, had 3 years of almost happiness before he got sick, 3 years of forgetting she'd ever been anything other than a wife. Now Thomas was dead. The baby was dead, and Maggie had a choice to make. She could keep selling pies, keep being invisible, keep letting the town's judgment define her. Or she could walk 5 miles to the Brennan Ranch, knock on Jacob Brennan's door, and say yes to work. What kind of work, though? That was the question. He'd said he had a ranch that needed someone who didn't quit, but ranch work was physical, demanding. She was fat and 40 and hadn't done hard labor in years, unless he'd seen the same thing she'd seen, the child in the chair, the little girl with dark hair and empty eyes who looked like she'd given up. If that's what Jake Brennan wanted, if he wanted someone to help his daughter the way Maggie had helped those soldiers, then this wasn't about cooking at all. This was about the one thing she was actually good at. Maggie sat up in bed, made her decision. Tomorrow she'd walk to the Brennan Ranch. She'd take the job whatever it was. She'd face the town's judgment and Constance Whitmore's condemnation and Gerald Thorne's schemes. And if she was very lucky and very brave, she might just save that little girl. The same little girl who 3 miles away lay in her own bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what her mother's voice sounded like. Emma couldn't remember. That was the worst part. 4 years since Mama died, and Emma couldn't remember the sound of her voice. Couldn't remember the smell of her hair. Could barely remember her face except in photographs, and photographs were still and dead and wrong. What she could remember was the accident. Every detail. Every second. The feel of the Mustang under her, Papa shouting instructions, the snake that spooked the horse, the moment of weightlessness, the impact, the crack, the way her legs went numb immediately like someone had cut the strings that connected them to her body, and Papa's face. Oh, she remembered Papa's face, white, terrified, guilty. He'd been the one to put her on that horse. He'd been the one to say she needed to be tough like Mama, needed to learn to handle difficult animals, needed to prove herself, prove that she was worth keeping, that she could replace the baby that died with Mama, that she was strong enough to justify her existence. Emma didn't know, but she knew the accident was her fault somehow. Had to be, because otherwise why did Papa look at her like that? Like he was waiting for her to forgive him, like he needed her permission to stop feeling guilty. She couldn't give him that permission. Couldn't speak at all, actually. The words were there, locked inside, but releasing them would mean having conversations she didn't want to have, would mean acknowledging that everything had changed, would mean accepting that she'd never walk again, never run, never dance, never be normal. So she stayed silent. It was easier, but today had been different. Today in the market she'd seen a woman, a big woman. Fat everyone would say, though Emma thought that was a mean word. Soft maybe, round, like a cushion or a cloud. The woman had been on her knees picking up pieces of a pie. People had been laughing. Emma had seen that before, had been on the receiving end of it actually, the way people looked at her now. Poor little cripple, such a tragedy. What a shame. But the woman hadn't looked ashamed, hadn't looked broken. She'd just kept working, kept her back straight, kept her face calm. And then Papa had done something Emma had never seen him do before. He'd defended someone. Not just defended, championed. Stood up in front of the whole town and said basically this woman matters. Her work matters. And anyone who has a problem with that has a problem with me. Emma had felt something shift in her chest. Not a big shift. Not hope exactly. But something. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself. A sliver of light in a very dark room. When Sam had wheeled her past the woman's table, Emma had looked up, made eye contact, wanted to say something but didn't know what. The woman had looked back, not with pity, not with discomfort, just looked. Like Emma was a person, like Emma mattered. Now Emma lay in bed and thought about that look, thought about the way Papa had stood up for someone who wasn't family, wasn't friend, was just a stranger who made good pies and refused to be small. Maybe Emma thought, maybe that woman could teach her something. Maybe that woman knew what it felt like to be looked at like you were broken and refused to let that define you. Maybe. The words sat in Emma's mind like a bird on a branch, tentative, ready to fly away at the slightest movement. But there, 3 miles away in a ranch house library that smelled like leather and whiskey, Jake Brennan sat in the dark and made plans. He'd pay Margaret Sullivan $7 a day, more than fair for a cook, high enough to make her feel valued, low enough that he could justify it to the ranch accounts. He'd give her a room in the main house, separate, private, nothing improper, but close enough that she could interact with Emma regularly. He wouldn't tell her about Emma's condition right away, wouldn't explain what he actually wanted, would just offer the job and see how she reacted. If she took it, and if she proved competent, then he'd explain about Emma, ask for help, hope she knew something the doctors didn't. It was a long shot. Hell, it was barely a shot at all. But Jake was running out of options and time and money, and sometimes when you were drowning you grabbed whatever driftwood floated past. Margaret Sullivan was driftwood. Possibly. Maybe. Or maybe she was something more. He thought about the way she'd stood up to Constance Whitmore, the way she'd spoken truth without fear, the way she'd looked at his money like it was charity and she was too proud to take it even though she clearly needed it desperately. pride was good. Jake understood pride, lived by it, could work with it. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd ride into town, find Margaret Sullivan, make the offer official, and then for better or worse, whatever happened next would happen. In Silver Creek, in a banker's office above the general store, Gerald Thorne sat at his desk and read a telegram by lamplight. The telegram had arrived 3 hours ago. He'd been waiting for it for weeks, ever since he'd started digging into Margaret Sullivan's past. Because something about that woman had bothered him. The way she held herself, the way she seemed to have skills beyond what a simple widow should have. Now he knew why. The telegram was from an associate in Virginia, a man who specialized in finding information others wanted to hide. The message was brief but illuminating. Subject: Margaret Sullivan. Born Margaret Hayes, 1845, Pennsylvania. Married Thomas Sullivan, 1874, Wyoming Territory. Before marriage worked as laundress Army Hospital No. 12, Virginia, 1864 to 1865. Discharged for conduct unbecoming after incident with commanding officer. Details attached in letter to follow. Thorne smiled, set down the telegram, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and drank it slowly, savoring both the burn and the implications. So, Margaret Sullivan had a past that involved the Army and misconduct and being discharged. The details would arrive by post in a few days, but Thorne didn't need details yet. He just needed leverage. And now he had it. If Jake Brennan wanted to hire the fat widow, let him. Let him bring her into his home. Let the town gossip. Let everyone speculate. Thorne would wait, would gather his information, and when the moment was right, when it would cause maximum damage and maximum chaos, he'd reveal what Margaret Sullivan really was: an incompetent, a disgrace, a woman who'd been thrown out of the Army for behavior so bad they wouldn't even keep her during a war when they needed every able body they could find. That would destroy her, destroy Jake's faith in her, destroy whatever small reputation she'd managed to maintain. And without Jake's protection, without his public support, Margaret Sullivan would have no choice but to accept Thorne's offer. Sell her land, sell her house, disappear into one of his tenant buildings and never bother him again. Thorne poured another drink, raised it to the darkness. To leverage, he said quietly, and to stupid men who think they can win by being noble. He drank. Outside, Silver Creek slept. Decent folk in decent beds, dreaming decent dreams. Tomorrow, there would be church, work, the ordinary rhythms of frontier life. But change was coming. Change wrapped in the shape of a fat widow who made good pies and refused to stay invisible. Change that would ripple through the town like stones thrown in still water. Some people would drown in those ripples. Others would learn to swim. And one little girl lying in darkness 3 miles from town would finally remember what hope felt like. 3 days passed before Maggie made her decision final. 3 days of counting and recounting the $30 Jake Brennan had given her. 3 days of staring at the tax notice Gerald Thorne had posted on her door. 3 days of weighing pride against survival and finding that survival barely tipped the scales. On the 4th morning, she woke before dawn, washed her face in cold water from the basin, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and put on her least worn dress, dark blue calico with small flowers. It had been Rebecca Brennan's once. Someone at the church had given it to Maggie after Thomas died, thinking charity would be welcome. Maggie had almost burned it on principle. Instead, she'd altered it to fit her larger frame, let out the seams, added panels where necessary. Waste, not want not. The irony of wearing a dead woman's dress to ask her widower for work did not escape her. She packed a small cloth bag, a change of clothes, her good apron, the carved wooden spoon Thomas had made for their first anniversary. Not because she expected to stay, but because going unprepared felt like admitting defeat before the battle even started. The walk to the Brennan Ranch was 5 miles. Maggie started at sunrise when the air was still cool and the light painted everything gold. Her feet hurt by mile 2. Her back ached by mile 3. But she kept walking because turning back would mean giving up, and Maggie Sullivan had forgotten how to give up somewhere between burying a husband and burying a child. The ranch appeared gradually. First, the fence-lined, sturdy split rail marking the boundary. Then, the grazing land, rolling hills covered in autumn grass where cattle dotted the landscape like dark stones. Then the buildings, barn, stable, bunkhouse, cookhouse, and finally the main house itself. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning light. It looked substantial, prosperous, the kind of place that could weather drought and hard times and come out standing. Maggie reached the gate just as the sun cleared the eastern hills. Her dress was dusty. Her hair had come loose. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a desperate woman showing up uninvited to beg for work. She opened the gate. Sam Tucker met her halfway up the drive. She recognized him from town, the one-armed man who'd been pushing Emma's chair. Up close, he looked older than she'd thought. 60, maybe more, with weathered skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He carried himself like a soldier, stood like someone used to being obeyed. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, and his voice held neither welcome nor hostility, just observation. "You're here early." "I'm here for work. Mr. Brennan said he might have a position." Did he now? Sam studied her with uncomfortable intensity. What kind of position you figure a ranch needs that boss would offer it to a woman he don't know? I assumed cooking, housekeeping, the usual. "We got a cookhouse. We got ranch hands who clean their own gear." Maggie lifted her chin. "Then perhaps Mr. Brennan will tell me himself what he needs, if he's available." "He's available. Question is whether you're really here for what he's offering." "I don't understand." Sam's expression softened slightly. Not much, but enough to show he wasn't being cruel, just careful. "Boss is desperate. That makes him vulnerable, makes him likely to grab at straws. I need to know if you're a straw or something more substantial." "I need work. I need money. That makes me desperate too. But I'm good at what I do, Mr. Tucker, whatever that ends up being." "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you clean?" "Yes." "Can you keep your mouth shut when the town starts talking, because they will talk? They'll say you trapped him, used his daughter, sold yourself, every ugly thing they can think of." Maggie met his gaze without flinching. "They've been saying ugly things about me for 3 years. I'm still here." Sam nodded slowly. "That you are." He gestured toward the house. "Come on then. Boss is in the kitchen. Fair warning, his coffee tastes like boot leather." They walked together up the drive. Maggie tried not to look around too obviously, but she couldn't help noticing the details. Well-maintained fences, healthy cattle, men already at work, even though it was barely past dawn. This was a serious operation, not some struggling homestead, which made the question more pressing. Why did Jake Brennan need her? The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Jake stood at the stove, spatula in hand, looking profoundly uncomfortable with domestic labor. He wore work clothes, denim pants, cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing forearms corded with muscle. His dark hair needed cutting. The scar on his cheek stood out white against tanned skin. He looked up when she entered. Something crossed his face. Relief, maybe, or surprise that she'd actually come. "Mrs. Sullivan." He set down the spatula. "You walked—" "I don't have a horse." 5 miles. I'm used to walking." Jake exchanged a glance with Sam. Some wordless communication passed between them. Sam shrugged and poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "You came about the job," Jake said, "if the offer's still open." "It is, but I should be honest about what I'm asking." Here it comes, Maggie thought. The real request. The thing that would explain why a wealthy rancher would publicly defend a woman he didn't know and offer her work she wasn't qualified for. Jake poured coffee into a tin cup, handed it to her. Their fingers didn't touch but came close. "Have you had breakfast?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Maggie took the coffee. It was indeed terrible, bitter, and strong enough to strip paint. She drank it anyway. "No, I haven't had breakfast." Jake turned back to the stove, cracked eggs into the pan with more force than necessary. "The job isn't just cooking. I mean, it includes cooking. We'd pay you to cook. $7 a day. $7. Maggie's monthly rent was $5. She could pay the tax bill in a month, maybe less. Could start saving. Could stop living on the edge of destitution. But, Jake continued, there's something else I need. Someone I need you to meet. Your daughter. He turned to look at her. Sam told you. No. But I saw her in town. Saw the way you looked at her. The way she looked at nothing. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, she hasn't spoken in 8 months. Not since the accident that paralyzed her. Doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with her voice. It's something else. Something I can't reach. What makes you think I can? Honestly, nothing. I don't know you. Don't know your qualifications. But I saw the way you stood up in that market. Saw you take humiliation and turn it into something else. Something strong. And I thought maybe that's what Emma needs to see. Someone who refuses to be broken. Maggie set down her coffee cup. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a miracle worker. If doctors can't help your daughter, I don't see how a fat widow who makes pies can do better. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking you to be present, to exist around her without pity or fear or any of the other things people bring when they look at damaged children, to just be normal. I don't think I can do that. Why not? Because I'm lying. Maggie wanted to say, because I do know how to help paralyzed people walk. Because I've done it before dozens of times in a field hospital where men came in broken and left whole. Because if I do what you're actually asking, if I use the skills I'm not supposed to have, then questions will be asked. And those questions will lead back to Virginia, to William Henderson, to the discharge I've spent 10 years trying to forget. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, because I might fail. And then where does that leave your daughter? In the same place she is now, silent and fading. At least this way we tried something. The eggs were burning. Jake cursed under his breath and pulled the pan off the heat. Sam, who'd been observing this entire exchange with quiet interest, took over. Scraped the eggs onto plates with practiced efficiency, set bread on the table. Butter, jam. Eat, Sam said. Both of you. Then we'll go see the girl and find out if this madness has any chance of working. They ate in silence. The food was mediocre but filling. Maggie hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. Hadn't eaten much in 3 days, too anxious about the decision to come here. Jake ate mechanically, his attention somewhere else. Maggie recognized that look. Had worn it herself after Thomas died. The expression of someone going through motions because stopping would mean acknowledging how bad things really were. When they finished, Jake stood. She's in her room. I should warn you she might not react at all. She spends most days just staring out the window. That's fine. And if you feel uncomfortable if this doesn't work, you can leave. No hard feelings. I'll still pay you for today. Mr. Brennan, Maggie stood to smoothed her dress. I didn't walk 5 miles to turn around after 5 minutes. Show me your daughter. Emma's room was on the 2nd floor at the end of a hallway lined with family photographs. Maggie caught glimpses as they passed. A younger Jake with a beautiful dark-haired woman, Rebecca, presumably. The same woman holding a baby. Emma at various ages. Smiling, running, alive in ways the girl Maggie had seen at the market was not. Jake knocked softly on a closed door. Emma, I'm coming in. I've brought someone I want you to meet. No response. He opened the door anyway. The room was large and bright with windows facing east toward the sunrise. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, shelves lined with books and carved wooden animals. And by the window in a wheeled chair that looked handmade and sturdy sat Emma Brennan. She didn't turn when they entered, just kept staring out at the ranch land beyond the glass. Her dark hair was neatly braided. Her dress was clean. Someone was taking care of her physical needs, even if they couldn't reach whatever was happening inside. Jake approached slowly, knelt beside the chair so he could look up at his daughter's face. Emma, honey, this is Mrs. Sullivan. She's going to be helping around the house for a while. I thought you might like to meet her. Still no response. Not even a flicker of recognition. Jake's face tightened. Maggie saw the pain there, raw and immediate. This was a man watching his child disappear and having no power to stop it. Maggie stepped forward. Not close enough to crowd, but close enough to be present. "Hello, Emma. My name is Margaret, but most people call me Maggie. Your father says you like books. I like books too. Maybe sometime we could read together." Nothing. Jake stood defeat written in every line of his body. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought you up here. This was a stupid idea." "Give me a moment." Maggie moved to the window, stood beside Emma's chair, not looking at the girl, but out at the same view. "That's a lot of land. Must be peaceful watching the cattle, watching the seasons change. I imagine you can see storms coming from miles away up here." Emma's fingers twitched. Just slightly. Just enough. Maggie continued, keeping her voice conversational. "I used to know a boy who couldn't walk. He'd been shot in the war. Doctors said he'd be in a chair the rest of his life. But he didn't believe them. Used to sit by a window just like this and watch birds flying. Said if they could move, maybe he could too." Now Emma's head turned. Just a fraction. Just enough to suggest she was listening. "It took him 6 months. 6 months of trying and failing and trying again. But eventually he stood up. Took 3 steps before his legs gave out. But those 3 steps were everything." Maggie paused. "His name was John. I wonder sometimes what happened to him, whether he kept walking, whether he ever got to where he was going." Silence stretched, then so quietly Maggie almost missed it. Emma spoke. "Did he?" 2 words, the first words in 8 months. Jake made a strangled sound, pressed his hand over his mouth. Maggie kept her eyes on the window, kept her voice steady. "I don't know, sweetheart. I lost track of him after the war. But I like to think he did. I like to think he's out there somewhere walking just fine." Emma turned to look at her fully now. The girl's eyes were gray like her father's, and ancient in a way 8-year-old eyes should never be. "Can you help me walk?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Maggie felt Jake's attention focus on her with laser intensity. This was it. The moment where she had to decide, admit her skills and face the questions, or lie and let this child continue suffering. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I can try," Maggie said, "but it won't be easy. It'll hurt. You'll want to quit, and I'll make you keep going anyway because that's what John's nurse did for him." "You were a nurse. A long time ago, in a different life." Emma studied her with uncomfortable intensity. Then, "Okay, you can try." Jake was crying, actually crying, silent tears running down his scarred cheek. He wiped them away, roughly turned away, as if ashamed to be seen like this. Maggie knelt beside Emma's chair. "I need you to understand something. I can't make promises. I can't guarantee you'll walk again. All I can do is teach you what I know and hope it's enough. Is that acceptable?" Emma nodded. "Good. Then we'll start tomorrow. Today you rest. Tomorrow we work." "What kind of work?" "The hard kind. The kind that makes you strong." For the first time since Maggie had entered the room, something flickered in Emma's eyes. Not hope exactly. Something more fragile. Possibility. Maggie stood, looked at Jake. "I'll take the job. $7 a day plus room and board if that's still part of the offer." Jake nodded, apparently not trusting his voice. "Good. Then show me where I'll be staying and we'll discuss a schedule. Emma needs routine, structure. And she needs to see me doing normal things, not just hovering over her like she's made of glass." Sam appeared in the doorway. "I'll show her the room, boss. You stay here with Emma." Jake didn't argue. Just moved to his daughter's side, knelt again, took her small hand in his larger one. "Baby girl," he said, his voice wrecked. "You spoke. You actually spoke." "I'm trying, Papa," Emma said. "I'm trying to be brave like you wanted." "Oh, sweetheart, you're already the bravest person I know." Maggie followed Sam out of the room, leaving father and daughter to their moment. The hallway seemed darker now, or maybe that was just the contrast from Emma's bright room. "That was well done," Sam said quietly. "The story about the soldier, true." "Yes, and you can actually help her." Or were you just saying what the boss wanted to hear? Maggie stopped walking, looked at Sam directly. I was a surgical nurse for 18 months during the war. I specialized in mobility injuries. I've helped dozens of men learn to walk again after doctors said it was impossible. Yes, I can help her, but it'll take time and work and there's no guarantee of success. Sam nodded slowly. Why didn't you tell boss this in the kitchen? Because the last time I admitted my medical knowledge, I got discharged from the Army. And because if I fail with Emma, I don't want Jake Brennan thinking I promised something I couldn't deliver. Fair enough? Sam resumed walking. Your room's this way. It was Rebecca's sewing room before. Boss had it converted when we thought we might need a live-in housekeeper. Never got around to hiring one until now. The room was small but clean. A bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window, a washstand with pitcher and basin. Nothing fancy, but infinitely better than Maggie's one-room house in town. You'll share the washroom with Emma, Sam continued. It's next door. We take meals in the kitchen, ranch hands eat at the cookhouse. Boss usually eats alone, but maybe that'll change now. Any questions? When do I start? Boss would probably say tomorrow, but given that you walked 5 miles this morning, I'd say you start after you've rested. Get settled. We'll call you for lunch. Sam left. Maggie sat on the bed, felt the mattress give beneath her weight. Real feathers, not straw. Luxury she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She thought about Emma, about the way the girl's fingers had twitched at the mention of walking, about the 2 words that had broken 8 months of silence. Did he, Maggie, didn't know if John had kept walking? Didn't even know if John had survived the war, to be honest. She'd used his story because it was hopeful, and hope was what Emma needed right now. But there was another story she could have told. The story of William Henderson, the boy who died screaming because bureaucracy mattered more than medicine. The boy whose death had ended Maggie's career and sent her running back to Wyoming with her skills hidden and her confidence shattered. She hadn't saved William. Maybe she couldn't save Emma either. But God help her, she was going to try. Downstairs, Jake sat in his office and tried to process what had just happened. Emma had spoken. After 8 months of silence, after dozens of failed attempts to reach her, a fat widow he barely knew had walked in and somehow broken through in less than 10 minutes. Magic. It felt like magic. Except magic wasn't real, which meant Margaret Sullivan had done something, been something that resonated with his daughter in a way nothing and no one else had. The story about the soldier. That had been the key. Emma had responded not to sympathy or coddling, but to a story about someone like her who'd refused to give up, which meant Margaret Sullivan understood something fundamental about his daughter. Maybe understood something about pain and perseverance that came from experience rather than imagination. There was more to her story. Jake was certain of it. People didn't develop that kind of understanding by accident. And the way she'd said, "I was a nurse," suggested a past she wasn't eager to discuss. But right now, in this moment, Jake didn't care about her past, only about what she could do for his future, for Emma's future. $7 a day was nothing. He'd pay $70 if it would bring his daughter back. Sam knocked on the office door frame. She settled, told her to rest before lunch. "Thank you. Boss, we need to talk about what just happened." Emma spoke. That's what happened. Emma spoke because Mrs. Sullivan told her about a paralyzed soldier who learned to walk, which suggests Mrs. Sullivan has experience with paralyzed people, which suggests she's more than just a cook. Sam sat down across from Jake. She told me she was a surgical nurse during the war, said she specialized in mobility injuries. Jake leaned forward. "Are you serious?" "That's what she said. Also said she got discharged for it. Didn't elaborate on why." "Do you believe her?" "I believe she knows something. Whether she knows enough, that's the question." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "If she can help Emma walk again, I'll give her the damn ranch. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. She said it'll take time, said there's no guarantee. We need to be prepared for this not to work." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I saw your face up there. You looked at that woman like she was the second coming. And maybe she is everything we need. But maybe she's just someone desperate enough to say what you want to hear." Jake shook his head. "She wasn't lying. I've seen enough liars to know the difference." "I hope you're right, boss. Because if you're wrong, it's not just you who gets hurt. It's Emma." Sam left. Jake sat alone with his thoughts and the account ledger still open on his desk. 60 days to pay Thorne $5,000. Emma's treatment would cost money. Hiring Margaret Sullivan would cost money. Everything cost money he didn't have. But Emma had spoken. And for that, Jake would find a way. The lunch bell rang at noon. Maggie woke from a doze she hadn't meant to take, disoriented by the unfamiliar room and the soft bed. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything gold. She washed her face, pinned her hair, and went downstairs. The kitchen was full. Sam, 3 ranch hands she didn't recognize, Jake standing at the counter looking uncertain, and Emma wheeled to the table staring at an empty plate. Everyone looked up when Maggie entered. "Mrs. Sullivan," Jake said, "I hope you rested well." "I did, thank you." Awkward silence. No one seemed to know what to do next. Then Emma spoke up, her voice still quiet but stronger than this morning. "Is Mrs. Sullivan going to eat with us?" Jake blinked. "If she'd like to." "I'd like that," Maggie said. She took a seat beside Emma, not across from her or far away, but right beside, close enough to be present without crowding. The ranch hands introduced themselves. Charlie young and thin, Ben older and weathered, Luis somewhere in between with kind eyes and work-worn hands. Pete, quiet and sullen, barely nodded before focusing on his food. They were polite but wary, clearly unsure what to make of a woman at the table. Sam brought out food, cold chicken, bread, pickles, simple fare but well prepared. They ate. Conversation was sparse, uncomfortable. But halfway through the meal, Emma looked at Maggie. "Can we start today the exercises? Tomorrow's better. Today you rest." "But I want to start now." Maggie set down her fork. "Emma, I know you're eager, but healing isn't something you rush. Your body needs to be ready. We need to build strength gradually." "How gradually?" "Very. We'll start with small movements, flex and release, building the muscles that still work so they can support the ones that don't." Emma's face fell. "That sounds boring." "It is boring. That's why most people quit. But you're not going to quit, are you?" "No." "Then you'll do the boring work. And eventually the boring work becomes progress." Jake was watching this exchange with fascination. "How long do you think it'll take before we see improvement?" "Weeks? Months, maybe. Every injury is different." "But there will be improvement." Maggie chose her words carefully. "There should be. But I need to examine her first. Understand what we're working with, and I'll need supplies, books if possible, medical texts on spinal injuries." "I can get those," Jake said immediately. "Whatever you need. Then we'll start properly tomorrow morning. For now, Emma, I want you to try something. Flex your toes. Just try. Tell me what happens." Emma concentrated, her small face scrunched with effort. After a moment, she shook her head. "I can't feel them." "Can you feel your legs at all?" "Sometimes, like pins and needles. But when I try to move them, nothing happens." Maggie nodded. This was actually good news. Sensation meant the nerves weren't completely severed. Meant there was possibility. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll start mapping what you can feel and what you can't. We'll work on the muscles above the injury first, your core, your back. Getting those strong will make everything else easier. And then I'll walk. And then we'll see." It wasn't the answer Emma wanted, but it was the truthful one. Maggie wouldn't lie to this child, wouldn't make promises she couldn't keep. False hope was crueler than no hope at all. After lunch, the ranch hands went back to work. Sam took Emma to her room for a rest. Jake asked Maggie to walk with him. They went outside into the afternoon heat. The ranch spread out around them, vast and alive with activity. Men working, cattle grazing, the kind of operation that required constant attention and considerable skill to maintain. "Thank you," Jake said after they'd walked in silence for a minute, for everything you did today, for giving Emma hope. I gave her honesty. Hope is what she chose to do with it. Still, you could have made promises, could have told her exactly what she wanted to hear. And then when I failed, she'd never trust anyone again. Better to be realistic. Jake stopped walking, turned to face her. Do you think you'll fail? I think failure is possible. I think success is possible. I won't know which until we try. That's not a very comforting answer. I'm not here to comfort you, Mr. Brennan. I'm here to help your daughter, if I can. He smiled slightly. You're direct. I like that. I'm practical. Directness is just a side effect. They resumed walking. The fence line stretched ahead of them, rails perfectly straight, posts solid. Jake's work or his men's work, but either way it spoke to competence and pride. Can I ask you something, Jake said, about your nursing? Sam said you told him you were discharged. Maggie's spine stiffened. What about it? Just curious what happened. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing truth against self-preservation. Finally, I challenged a commanding officer, told him his refusal to authorize an emergency amputation had killed a soldier, used language that was inappropriate. They couldn't fire me for being right, so they called it conduct unbecoming. Were you right? Yes. Then they were wrong to discharge you. Right and wrong don't matter much when you're powerless. Jake nodded slowly. I know that feeling. They walked in silence for a while longer. Then Jake said, There's something you should know, something about why I'm so desperate for Emma to get better. Maggie waited. I'm about to lose this ranch. 60 days to pay Gerald Thorne $5,000 or the bank forecloses. If that happens, I can't pay you. Can't give Emma the time and resources she needs to heal. Can't do anything except watch everything fall apart. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want you blindsided if things go bad. And because I need you to understand that whatever happens, helping Emma is the priority. Not the ranch, not my pride. Her. Maggie looked at him. Really looked, saw the exhaustion etched into his face, the worry lines, the weight of responsibility crushing down on shoulders that had already carried too much. I understand, she said. But Mr. Brennan, you need to understand something too. I can help your daughter. I believe I can. But if you want me to succeed, you need to let me work without interference. No hovering, no questioning every decision. Trust me or replace me. That's a hell of an ultimatum. It's honesty, same as what I gave Emma. Jake extended his hand. Deal. Maggie shook it. His hand was rough, calloused, strong. The hand of a working man, not a gentleman rancher. It reassured her somehow. $7 a day, she said, starting today. Agreed. They walked back to the house. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains. Long shadows stretched across the ranch. Somewhere a cow lowed, a horse whinnied. Life continued its ordinary rhythms. But nothing was ordinary anymore, because Margaret Sullivan had walked through the gate this morning and agreed to try the impossible. And Jake Brennan, desperate and broken and hanging on by threads, had let her. That evening, as darkness fell and the ranch settled into night, 3 separate events occurred that would shape everything to come. First, in Silver Creek, Gerald Thorne received a detailed letter from his associate in Virginia. The letter contained information about Margaret Sullivan's discharge, including testimony from Dr. Morrison about her insubordination and the death of Private William Henderson. Thorne read it twice, then locked it in his safe. Ammunition, he thought, to be used when the time was right. Second, in the ranch house, Emma lay in bed and whispered to herself, Practice. She was practicing words she hadn't said in 8 months. Simple words. Thank you. Please. Papa. Maggie. Each one felt strange, like learning a foreign language. But she kept trying, kept pushing, because for the first time in forever she had a reason to fight. Third, in the small room that smelled of lavender and old wood, Maggie knelt beside her bed and did something she hadn't done since Thomas died. She prayed, not for success, not for miracles, just for strength, for wisdom, for the ability to help this broken child without destroying herself in the process. Outside her window, Wyoming stars blazed cold and distant. The night was quiet except for wind and the far-off sound of cattle. Peaceful, beautiful, but change was coming. Change that would test everyone involved. Change that would require courage and sacrifice and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that had kept Maggie standing in that market square while the world laughed at her. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, Emma Brennan would take her first steps toward healing. And tomorrow, whether any of them knew it or not, Gerald Thorne would make his first move in a game that would end with someone losing everything. But tonight, in the space between hope and fear, 3 people allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. They were wrong about the timeline, and right about everything else. The first week passed in a blur of routine and revelation. Maggie woke before dawn as she always had, dressed in the dark, made coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead and smooth enough that even Sam grudgingly admitted it was better than his. By the time the ranch came alive, she had breakfast ready. Biscuits, bacon, eggs cooked the way each man liked them without being asked twice. The ranch hands stopped being wary by day 3, started smiling by day 5. By day 7, Charlie was asking if she could make that apple pie again, and Ben was telling stories about his grandmother's cooking that bore suspicious resemblance to things Maggie had served. But the real work happened upstairs in Emma's bright room, where Maggie spent 2 hours every morning and 2 hours every afternoon teaching an 8-year-old girl how to feel her body again. They started small, impossibly small. Exercises so simple they looked like nothing. Flex your stomach muscles. Hold, release, good. Again. Emma would concentrate, her small face serious, and Maggie would place her hand on the girl's abdomen, feeling for the engagement that meant the muscles were working. "I can't tell if I'm doing it right," Emma said on the second day, frustrated. "You are. I can feel it. That's what matters right now. You'll feel it yourself eventually." When your nerves remember how to talk to your brain. Could be days, could be weeks, but it'll happen. They worked on core strength, back muscles, the large muscle groups that would provide the foundation for everything else. Maggie used techniques she'd learned in Virginia, adapted for a child instead of a grown man. Resistance exercises, assisted movements, slow patient building of strength that had atrophied during 8 months of immobility. And she talked. Constantly. Not medical jargon, but stories. More tales of soldiers she'd helped. John, who'd learned to walk. Marcus, who'd regained the use of his arm. Sarah, a woman who'd been paralyzed in a wagon accident and who'd eventually danced at her daughter's wedding. Emma drank in these stories like water in a drought. They gave her context, proof that healing was possible, that she wasn't alone in this struggle. On the 5th day, something changed. They were working on leg lifts, passive movements where Maggie lifted Emma's leg and asked her to resist the motion. Emma had been trying with no success to push back against Maggie's hand. Then suddenly, a twitch, small but definite. The quadriceps muscle contracting for just a fraction of a second. Emma felt it. Maggie saw the recognition flash across her face. Did that just happen?" "Yes." Maggie kept her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "Do it again." Emma concentrated. Nothing happened for 10 seconds, 20. Then another twitch, stronger this time. "I can feel it, Maggie. I can feel my leg." Not the whole leg, not consistent control, but something. A connection between intention and action that had been severed 8 months ago was starting to rebuild. Maggie sat back. "That's good work, Emma. Really good. But don't expect it to be that strong every time. Some days will be better than others. We just keep working." Emma was crying, happy tears. She looked up at Maggie with shining eyes. "You're magic." "I'm not magic. You did the work. I just showed you how." But later, when Jake asked how the session went, Maggie had to sit down before answering. Her hands were shaking. "She moved," Maggie said. Just a twitch, but it was voluntary. She made her muscle contract. Jake's face transformed. went from worn and worried to something approaching joy. That's good, right? That means she can heal. It means there's a pathway. Whether she can fully heal, I still don't know, but it's more than I hoped for this quickly. Jake did something unexpected then. He pulled Maggie into a hug. Quick, impulsive, immediately awkward. He released her just as fast, stepping back with a blush visible even through his tan. Sorry, Thank you. That's all. Thank you. Maggie's face felt hot. You're welcome. She fled to the kitchen, heart hammering. It was just gratitude, she told herself. Just a father relieved that his daughter might have a future. Nothing more. But she could still feel the solid warmth of him, could still smell the scent of leather and horses and honest work that clung to his clothes. She pushed the thought away. This was a job. Emma was a patient. Jake was her employer. Anything else was dangerous and foolish and absolutely out of the question. She kept telling herself that even as she found excuses to be in the same room as him, even as she caught herself watching him work through the kitchen window, even as she started to understand why Rebecca Brennan had married him. The second week brought visitors. Constance Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday morning driving her own buggy, looking like a judge coming to deliver sentence. Maggie saw her through the window and felt her stomach drop. Jake was out with the cattle. Sam was at the south pasture. Only Maggie and Emma were in the house. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer the door. Constance stood on the porch ramrod straight in her black dress, her face carved from disapproval. Mrs. Sullivan, I need to speak with you. Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to come in? No, what I have to say won't take long. Constance folded her hands. I want you to leave. Pack your things and go back to town. Mr. Brennan is a good man, but he's desperate and vulnerable. You're taking advantage of that. Maggie felt something cold settle in her chest. I'm doing the job he hired me for. You're doing more than that. Everyone in town is talking. The fat widow has trapped the rich rancher. She's using his daughter to worm her way into his home and his bed. His bed? Maggie's voice went sharp. I sleep in the guest room. I work with Emma during the day and cook meals. That's all. For now. But I've seen this before. Women like you, desperate and scheming, attaching themselves to men with money. It always ends in scandal. Women like me. Maggie stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her so Emma wouldn't hear. You mean fat women, widows, women who don't know their place. Is that what you mean, Constance? I mean women without morals or dignity. You don't know anything about my morals or dignity. You've decided who I am based on how I look, based on gossip and assumptions. You haven't asked me a single question, haven't tried to understand. You've just judged. Constance's face went tight. I'm trying to protect this family. From what? Someone who actually cares, who's helping Emma walk again, who's making Jake's life a little less impossible. Maggie felt anger building hot and clean. Where were you 8 months ago, Constance? When Emma stopped speaking, when Jake was drowning in grief, where was your concern then? I was praying for them. How helpful. I'm sure your prayers really made a difference. Maggie knew she should stop, knew she was crossing lines that would be difficult to uncross. But the unfairness of it all, the sheer audacity of this woman showing up to pass judgment, pushed her past caring. You want to help? Then leave us alone. Let me do my job. Let Emma heal. And stop spreading poison about people you don't understand. Constance took a step back. Her expression shifted from disapproving to something harder. You'll regret this. When the truth about your past comes out. When everyone learns what you really are. You'll regret every word. She left, drove away in a cloud of dust and righteous fury. Maggie stood on the porch, shaking, not with fear, but with the aftermath of adrenaline. She'd just made an enemy, a powerful one. Constance Whitmore could turn the entire town against her with a few well-placed words. The door opened behind her. Emma wheeled herself onto the porch. I heard, Emma said quietly. I heard what she said about you. Emma, you should be resting. Is it true? Are you using Papa? Maggie knelt beside the wheelchair. "No, I'm not using anyone. I'm here to help you, that's all." "But you like him, I can tell." Children saw too much, understood too much. Maggie had forgotten that. "Your father is a good man, but I work for him, Emma. Nothing more." Mama liked him too before they got married. She said he was stubborn and annoying and she couldn't stop thinking about him. Maggie couldn't help but smile slightly. "Your mother sounds like she was smart." "She was. She would have liked you." "How do you know?" Emma thought about this seriously. "Because you make Papa laugh. He hasn't laughed since Mama died. But yesterday when you burned the bacon and said a bad word, he laughed, really laughed. Mama would have liked that." Maggie's throat tightened. "Come on, let's get you back inside. We have exercises to do." They went inside, but Maggie couldn't stop thinking about Constance's threat. When the truth about your past comes out, what truth did Constance know, or what did she think she knew? The answer came 3 days later. Jake returned from town with supplies and a grim expression. He found Maggie in the kitchen, asked Sam to take Emma upstairs, then closed the door. "Gerald Thorne came to see me today." Maggie's hand stilled in the bread dough she'd been kneading. "What did he want?" "To tell me about you. About your discharge from the Army. About a soldier named William Henderson who died under your care." The kitchen seemed to shrink. Maggie forced herself to keep kneading, keep her hands moving even though everything inside her had gone cold and still. "What did he say exactly?" "That you were discharged for misconduct, that you'd been negligent, that a man died because you made the wrong decision." Jake paused. "He said I should fire you before you hurt Emma the same way." "And what did you say?" "I told him to go to hell." Maggie's hands stopped. She looked up at Jake, searching his face for anger or doubt or disappointment. Found none of those things. "You didn't ask if it was true." "Is it?" "Yes and no." Maggie wiped flour from her hands, sat down at the table because her legs felt suddenly unsteady. "William Henderson did die. I was his nurse, and I was discharged for insubordination, but it wasn't negligence." She told him the story. All of it. The gangrene, her pleas for immediate amputation, Dr. Morrison's refusal, the general's bureaucratic delays, William's death, her rage, the discharge. Jake listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So you were right." "Yes." "And they punished you for it." "Yes." "That's about what I figured." Jake pulled out a chair, sat across from her. "Maggie, I don't care what happened 10 years ago. I care what's happening now. And what's happening now is that Emma is getting better. She's speaking, moving, smiling. I haven't seen her smile in 8 months. If you did that, if you're capable of that kind of healing, then whatever mistakes you made during the war are forgiven. They weren't mistakes." "I know. That's what I'm saying. You did the right thing and got punished for it. Well, I'm not punishing you. Thorne can spread whatever lies he wants. You're staying." Maggie felt something break loose in her chest. Relief. Gratitude. Something else she didn't want to name. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep helping my daughter." But Jake didn't move. Didn't stand up and walk away. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers, warm and solid and steady. "Maggie, I need you to know something. This job, what you're doing for Emma, it's not just about healing her body. You've given her hope, given me hope, given this whole house something to believe in again. That's worth more than I can pay you. You're paying me $7 a day. That's generous. It's not enough, not nearly enough, but it's what I can afford right now." He squeezed her hand gently. "If things were different, if I wasn't about to lose this ranch, if I had anything to offer besides debt and struggle and a daughter who needs more than I can give, if I was a different kind of man—" He trailed off. But Maggie understood what he wasn't saying, what he couldn't say. Not yet, not when everything was so precarious. "We should get back to work," she said quietly. "Yeah." Jake released her hand, stood up, walked to the door, stopped. "Maggie." "Yes." "I'm glad you came. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." He left. Maggie sat alone in the kitchen staring at her hand where his touch still seemed to linger like warmth. This was dangerous, this feeling growing between them. She couldn't afford it, couldn't risk her heart on a man who might lose everything, couldn't let herself hope for something that would never work. But it was too late for warnings, too late for caution. She was already falling. The third week brought crisis. Maggie woke on Monday morning to shouting, ran downstairs to find Sam and Jake in the kitchen, both looking grim. "What happened?" "Cattle," Sam said. 20 head missing from the north pasture, rustled sometime last night." "Rustled? You mean stolen?" "I mean taken by men who knew exactly what they were doing. Cut the fence, took the best breeding stock, left tracks heading toward Thorne's land." Jake was already pulling on his coat. "I'm going after them." "Boss, that's exactly what they want. You ride onto Thorne's property making accusations he'll have you arrested for trespassing." "Then what do you suggest? Let him steal my cattle." "I suggest we report it to the sheriff and let the law handle it." "The sheriff works for Thorne." "I know, but going in hot won't help." Jake looked like he wanted to punch something. Instead, he grabbed his rifle from the rack by the door. "I'm going to scout the north pasture, see what we're dealing with. Sam, get the men together. I want every head of cattle accounted for by tonight." He left. Sam followed. Maggie stood in the kitchen feeling useless. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. "What's wrong?" "Nothing for you to worry about. Come down. We'll have breakfast and then do your exercises." But Emma wasn't fooled. "Something's wrong. I can tell. Some cattle were stolen. Your father is handling it." "By Mr. Thorne?" Maggie was surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Because Mr. Thorne wants our ranch. He told Papa so, said if Papa couldn't pay the loan, the bank would take everything." Emma wheeled herself to the table. "I heard them talking. Papa doesn't know I was listening." "Emma, that's not something you should worry about." "But it is something to worry about, isn't it? If we lose the ranch, where will we go?" Maggie had no answer. She made breakfast mechanically. Emma picked at her food. Neither of them spoke much. The exercises that morning were subdued. Emma tried, but her heart wasn't in it. The progress they'd been making felt suddenly fragile, like it could evaporate if the wrong things happened. Jake didn't return until late afternoon. When he did, his face was set in lines that spoke of anger barely contained. 20 head, he told Maggie. "Best stock I had. Breeding cows worth $150 apiece, $3,000 gone in one night. Can you prove Thorne took them?" "Tracks lead to his land, but they stop at the property line. Sheriff says without evidence on Thorne's actual property, there's nothing he can do." "What will you do?" "I don't know." Jake slumped into a chair, looked older than his years. "I can't pay the loan without selling more cattle. But if I sell, I won't have enough stock to rebuild, and if Thorne keeps stealing, I'll be wiped out before the deadline anyway." Maggie wanted to comfort him, wanted to put her hand on his shoulder, offer words that would make this better. But what words were there? This was a practical problem with no easy solution. "I should check on Emma," she said instead. "Wait." Jake stood. "There's something else, something I need to tell you." "What?" "Thorne's planning something. I don't know what, but he came by the north pasture while I was there, made a point of letting me see him, said he'd heard I had a new employee, said he hoped I'd made a wise choice." "That was a threat." "Yes. He's going to come after you, Maggie. Going to use your past against me somehow. I need you to be prepared." "I am prepared. I've been preparing for this my whole life." Jake searched her face. "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent 10 years being punished for doing the right thing, being told I'm not good enough, not moral enough, not worthy of respect. If Thorne thinks he can scare me with more of the same, he's wrong. He can do more than scare you. He can destroy your reputation, make it impossible for you to work anywhere in the territory." "Let him try." Maggie felt anger building again, the same clean fury she'd felt with Constance. "I'm tired of hiding. Tired of apologizing for being competent. If Thorne wants a fight, he'll get one. Jake's expression shifted, went from worried to something else. Admiration, maybe, or attraction. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "I'm stubborn. Same thing sometimes." They stood close. Too close. Maggie could see the flecks of darker gray in Jake's eyes, could see the scar on his cheek, the beard shadow on his jaw, could smell leather and horses, and underneath it all something uniquely him. She should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember all the reasons this was a bad idea. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. "Jake," she whispered, I know this is complicated. But Maggie, I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting—" The door burst open. Sam rushed in, face grim. "Boss, you need to come now. The barn's on fire." They ran. The barn was fully engulfed by the time they got there. Flames roared 30 feet high, consuming hay and wood with terrifying speed. Black smoke billowed into the late afternoon sky. Ranch hands formed a bucket brigade from the well. Sam organized them with military precision, but it was clear they were going to lose the barn. The best they could hope for was to keep the fire from spreading to other buildings. Jake dove into the chaos, helped carry buckets, shouted orders, worked until his clothes were soaked with sweat and his face was black with soot. Maggie stayed with Emma, who'd been wheeled out onto the porch to watch. The girl was crying silently. "It's Papa's barn," Emma whispered. "It's where Mama's horse lived. All her things are in there." Maggie pulled Emma close. "I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry." They watched the barn burn, watched Jake and his men fight a losing battle, watched everything Rebecca Brennan had touched turn to ash and smoke. It took 3 hours for the fire to burn itself out. When the last flames died, Jake stood in the ruins, staring at what remained. Blackened timbers, melted metal, the skeleton of something that had once been whole. Sam approached carrying something, a kerosene can, dented but identifiable. "Found 3 of these behind the barn. This wasn't an accident, boss. Someone set this fire." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "Thorne. Probably. Can't prove it, but probably. He's declared war. Seems like." Jake looked at the destruction, at his exhausted men, at the house where Maggie and Emma waited. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Then we'll give him war. But first I need to make sure they're safe." He walked back to the house. Maggie met him at the door. "Emma's asleep. I gave her some warm milk and put her to bed." "Thank you." Jake looked wrung out, defeated. "Maggie, I can't keep you here. It's not safe. Thorne is escalating and I can't protect you." "I'm not leaving." "You have to. If he's willing to burn my barn, he might target the house next, might target you directly. I won't risk that." Maggie grabbed his arm. "Listen to me. If I leave now, Emma will think I abandoned her. She's finally starting to trust again, starting to believe the world isn't entirely cruel. If I disappear, that trust breaks. Do you understand?" "I understand, but I'd rather have her heartbroken than have you dead." "I'm not going to die, and neither is she. We're going to figure this out." Jake pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. They stood like that, breathing the same air, held together by exhaustion and fear and something stronger than both. "I can't lose you," Jake whispered. "Either of you." "You won't." But even as she said it, Maggie wondered if she was making a promise she couldn't keep. The 4th week brought revelation and revolution. Jake rode into town the next morning with Sam leaving the ranch in the care of trusted men and Maggie's watchful eye. He went to the sheriff's office, reported the barn fire, the kerosene cans, the clear evidence of arson. Sheriff Dalton took notes, made sympathetic noises, said he'd investigate, did nothing. Jake went to the bank, asked to see Gerald Thorne, was told Mr. Thorne wasn't available, was handed a notice that the loan payment deadline had been accelerated again. What was 60 days when this started, then 30 days last week, was now just 14 days. Thorne was tightening the noose. Bank policy, the clerk said. Nothing personal. Jake knew exactly how personal it was. He went to the general store, to the feed supplier, to every business owner in Silver Creek who might be willing to extend credit or make a deal. got polite refusals from everyone. Thorne had been thorough, had poisoned every possible well. By the time Jake returned to the ranch, he was out of options. He found Maggie in the kitchen making dinner. She took one look at his face and knew. No luck. Worse than no luck. The loan payment's been moved up. I have 30 days to come up with $5,000 or lose everything. Can you do it? Not without a miracle. Jake slumped into a chair. I'm going to lose this ranch, Maggie. Lose the home Emma grew up in, the land Rebecca loved, everything I've built. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron, sat down across from him. Then we need to find out why. Why is Thorne so determined to destroy you? What's worth all this effort? I've been asking myself the same question. There has to be a reason. Land speculation, water rights, something valuable you don't know about. Jake's eyes narrowed. The original survey. When I bought this property, there were rumors of mineral deposits. Silver maybe, but no one ever found anything, so I assumed it was just talk. Do you still have the survey maps? Rebecca kept them. In the... Jake's face fell. In the barn. Her office was in the barn. Did she have copies anywhere else? I don't know. Maybe in our bedroom. She had a desk there. They went upstairs. Emma was in her room napping after morning exercises. Jake led Maggie to the master bedroom. A large room with a bed too big for one person and a woman's desk by the window. They searched, found correspondence, household accounts, Emma's baby book, and finally in the bottom drawer a leather portfolio containing survey maps and property documents. Jake spread them on the desk, studied them with Maggie looking over his shoulder. There, Maggie said, pointing. What's that marking? Jake peered closer. A small notation in the corner, a surveyor's mark, and a word, silver. Son of a bitch, Jake breathed. There is silver on this land. Thorne knows. That's why he's pushing so hard. If that's true, this property is worth a fortune. If I can prove it, if I can find the vein, if I have time to develop it. Jake's hands clenched on the map. But I don't have time. I have 30 days. Then we use what we know. Go public. Tell everyone Thorne is trying to steal valuable land. Turn the town against him. The town is already against me. Against us. They'll just think I'm making excuses. Maggie was quiet for a moment thinking. Then, what if we had proof, not just the map? Physical proof. Actual silver. We'd need to dig, test, bring in an assayer. That takes time and money I don't have. Then we bluff. We tell Thorne we've found silver, make him think we're going to develop it, force his hand. That's dangerous. If he believes we're a threat, he might do something worse than steal cattle. He's already doing worse. He burned your barn. What's next? Jake looked at her. Really looked. Saw the determination in her face, the absolute refusal to back down. When did you become so ruthless? I've always been ruthless. I just hide it better than you do. Jake laughed, actually laughed despite everything. All right, we'll do it your way. But Maggie, if this goes wrong, if Thorne comes after you, then you protect Emma. That's all that matters. That's not all that matters. Jake reached out, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. You matter. To me, to Emma, to this whole place. You've become part of us, and I don't know what we'd do without you. Maggie's breath caught. They were close again. So close. His hand on her face, her hand rising to cover his. The maps forgotten. The danger forgotten. Everything forgotten except this moment. Jake, she whispered. He kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, testing, then deeper when she responded. Her hands fisted in his shirt, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. They kissed like drowning people, desperate and hungry and full of need too long denied. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I didn't mean to, didn't plan it. But I love you, Maggie Sullivan, and I need you to know that before everything goes to hell. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. But Jake, this is impossible. You're about to lose everything. I'm the woman everyone hates. We can't. We can. We will. After this is over, after we've dealt with Thorn, I'm going to marry you, if you'll have me. That's a terrible proposal. I know. I'll do better when we're not facing financial ruin. But I needed you to know, needed to say it out loud. Maggie kissed him again, softer this time, a promise more than a passion. We should get back, she said. Emma will be waking up. They went downstairs, found Emma already awake, wheeled into the kitchen, looking between them with knowing eyes. Finally, Emma said, I thought you'd never figure it out. Emma, Jake's face went red. What? It's obvious. You stare at her all the time. She stares at you. It's gross but also nice. Maggie couldn't help but laugh. How long have you been awake? Long enough to hear Papa say he loves you. So when's the wedding? There's no wedding, not yet. We have to deal with Mr. Thorn first. Emma's expression turned serious. He's trying to take our home. Yes. Are we going to let him? No, Jake said firmly. We're going to fight. Good. Emma looked at Maggie. Are you going to help? Yes. Then we'll win. You fix things. That's what you do. Such simple faith, such absolute trust. Maggie felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. I'll try my best. That's all anyone can do, Emma said wisely. The next morning, Jake rode into town with Maggie, left Emma in Sam's care. This was dangerous, potentially explosive, and he wanted Maggie where he could protect her. They went directly to the bank, demanded to see Gerald Thorn, were shown into his office where the banker sat behind his massive desk, looking supremely confident. Jacob, Mrs. Sullivan, to what do I owe the pleasure? Jake threw the survey map on the desk. You've known all along, about the silver. That's why you want my land. Thorn glanced at the map. His expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie. We found the vein. Had it assayed. It's worth at least $50,000. Probably more. This was the bluff. They'd found no vein, had no assay. But Thorn didn't know that. For just a moment something flickered in Thorn's eyes. Surprise, concern. Then his professional mask returned. If there's silver on your property, congratulations. But that doesn't change the fact that you owe this bank $5,000 in 30 days. It changes everything. Because now I can get investors, can develop the mine, can pay you back with interest. Can you? In 30 days, I doubt it. Give me an extension. 3 months? 6 months. I'll pay you back double. Bank policy doesn't allow extensions on defaulted loans. Since when you've extended loans for half the people in this county? For people with good credit and stable assets. You have neither. Jake leaned forward. What do you really want, Thorn? The money or the land? I want the bank's interests protected. Liar. You want that silver. Want it so badly you're willing to commit arson and theft and whatever else it takes. But I'm not selling. Not to you. Not to anyone. Thorn stood. Then enjoy the next 30 days, Jacob, because they'll be your last on that property. He looked at Maggie. And Mrs. Sullivan, I hope you're not planning to stay. When the ranch is foreclosed, Mr. Brennan won't be able to pay your wages. You'll be back to selling pies at the market, assuming anyone will still buy from you after they learn the full truth about your past. What truth would that be? Maggie kept her voice level. That you killed a soldier through incompetence, that you were discharged in disgrace, that every medical decision you make is suspect. Thorn smiled. I have documentation, testimony from your commanding officer, reports detailing your failures. Should I share them with the Territorial Medical Board? Get you officially barred from practicing any kind of medicine. Jake moved toward Thorn. Sam, who'd been standing by the door, intercepted him. Boss, don't. That's what he wants. He just threatened Maggie. I simply stated facts, Thorn said smoothly. Mrs. Sullivan knows what she did. The question is whether the rest of the territory should know too. Maggie stepped forward. Do it. Share your documentation. Tell everyone. I don't care anymore. Maggie, Jake said. No. I'm done hiding, done apologizing. If Thorne wants to destroy my reputation, let him try. But it won't change what I did for Emma, won't change the fact that she's walking again. Walking. Thorne's smile faltered. The crippled child is walking. Yes, because I taught her, because I know what I'm doing, and no amount of slander will change that. They left before Thorne could respond, walked out into the bright morning heads high despite the whispers that followed them down the street. That was brave, Jake said. Also possibly stupid. Probably both. Maggie's hands were shaking, but she kept them hidden in her skirts. What do we do now? Now we prepare for war, because Thorne knows we're not backing down, which means he's going to escalate. How much worse can it get? Jake looked at her grimly. We're about to find out. 2 days later, the territorial marshal arrived at the Brennan Ranch. Marshal William Hayes was a hard man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He rode up to the house with a deputy in tow and a paper in his hand. Jacob Brennan, that's me. I have a warrant for the arrest of Margaret Sullivan. Charges include practicing medicine without a license fraud and reckless endangerment of a minor. The world stopped. Maggie felt blood drain from her face. What? You're accused of treating Emma Brennan without proper credentials. Gerald Thorne filed a formal complaint with the territorial court. Says you've been performing medical procedures on a paralyzed child with no authority to do so. She's helping Emma, Jake said, his voice dangerous. My daughter is walking again because of her. Maybe so, but the law requires medical practitioners to have proper licensing, and Mrs. Sullivan doesn't have any. Hayes looked at Maggie with something like sympathy. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you need to come with me. No, Jake stepped between them. This is Thorne's doing. He's using the law to get rid of her because we won't sell him the ranch. Could be, but I still have to execute the warrant. What if she leaves? Goes back to town. Would that satisfy the charges? Jacob, Maggie said. Don't. What if I guarantee she'll appear for trial? Can we do that? Hayes considered. I could release her into your custody, but if she runs, you're liable. She won't run. Jake, I can't let you do this. If I disappear, you'll be arrested too. Then don't disappear. Jake turned to her, his eyes fierce. Stay. Fight. We'll face this together. And Emma, who'll work with her if I'm in jail. No one had an answer to that. Maggie made her decision, held out her wrists. I'll go. But Marshal, I want it noted that Emma Brennan has made remarkable progress under my care. Whatever Thorne says, whatever paperwork he's filed, that child was dying before I came here. Now she's living. That's not reckless endangerment. That's healing. Hayes nodded. I'll note it in my report. But Mrs. Sullivan, you should get a lawyer. These charges could mean jail time. They cuffed her, led her to the marshal's horse. Jake grabbed Hayes's arm. Take care of her. She's done nothing wrong. I'll do my job. That's all I can promise. Emma appeared on the porch, moving with her cane, but moving. Maggie, where are they taking you? Just to town, sweetheart. I'll be back. You promised? You said you wouldn't leave? I'm not leaving. This is temporary. Your father will fix it. But Emma was crying now, screaming. No, you can't take her. She's helping me. She's making me better. Sam held the girl back as she tried to wheel toward them. The sound of Emma's screams followed Maggie all the way down the drive. Jake stood frozen, watching the marshal take the woman he loved, powerless to stop it, helpless to fix it. And for the first time in his adult life, Jacob Brennan didn't know what to do. But knowing what to do and having the courage to do it were different things. Jake stood on his porch long after the marshal's dust cloud disappeared, his fists clenched, his jaw set. And somewhere deep in his chest, the guilt and helplessness that had paralyzed him since Rebecca's death began to transform into something else. Rage, clean, focused, productive rage. He turned to Sam. Get the men together, every single one. We ride to town in 1 hour. Boss, if you break her out of jail, you'll be arrested too. I don't care. And Emma, who takes care of her if both of you are in jail? Jake looked back at the house where his daughter stood crying on the porch. Sam was right, but doing nothing was also wrong. Then we do this legally. We prove Thorne is behind everything. We expose him. How? We got no proof of the rustling, no proof he set the fire. Then we get proof. Jake's eyes narrowed. Lucy Chen. Sam's eyebrows rose. The cafe owner. She keeps the books for half the businesses in town. If Thorne paid anyone to do his dirty work, money changed hands, and Lucy sees everything. They rode to town with 10 men, not to break Maggie out, but to gather evidence. Lucy Chen met them in her cafe after closing. The small woman looked terrified, but determined. Mr. Brennan, if Thorne finds out I talked to you— He won't, I promise. But I need to know. Have you seen anything that connects Thorne to the cattle rustling or the fire? Lucy hesitated, then reached under her counter and pulled out a ledger. Mr. Thorne keeps 2 sets of books, one for the bank, one for other things. I clean his office. I saw this in his safe one night when he forgot to lock it. I made a copy. Jake opened the ledger, saw entries, payments to Pete the ranch hand who'd betrayed him, payments to men listed as security but who were known rustlers. An entry marked incendiary materials dated 2 days before the barn fire. This is it, Jake breathed. This proves everything. There's more, Lucy said quietly. The arrest warrant for Mrs. Sullivan. Thorne paid Marshal Hayes's deputy $500 to push it through quickly. It's here, in writing. Jake looked at the evidence, then at Lucy. Why are you doing this, helping us? Because Mrs. Sullivan helped my son when he broke his arm. She said it perfectly wouldn't take payment, and because I'm tired of watching Thorne destroy good people. Lucy's eyes hardened. My late husband lost his business to Thorne's schemes. I won't let him do it again. The next morning, Jake stood before Judge Aldrich with the ledger Lucy as witness and half the town watching. Thorne's face went white when he saw the evidence, tried to bluster, tried to claim forgery. But Judge Aldrich had known corruption when he saw it. He just needed proof. Gerald Thorne, you're under arrest for arson, cattle rustling, bribery of a law enforcement officer, and conspiracy to defraud. The judge turned to Marshal Hayes. Release Mrs. Sullivan immediately. Charges dismissed. Maggie walked out of the jail into bright sunlight, into Jake's arms. It's over, he whispered. It's finally over. Not quite, Maggie said. She turned to face the crowd gathered in the street. Constance Whitmore stood at the edge, her face unreadable. I want everyone here to know something, Maggie said, her voice carrying across the square. I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm not ashamed of what I did during the war. I saved lives. I'll keep saving lives. And if that makes me unsuitable for your town, then your town isn't suitable for me. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, Constance Whitmore stepped forward. Mrs. Sullivan. The older woman's voice was tight. I owe you an apology. My daughter died in childbirth 20 years ago. The doctor said it was because of her weight. I've spent 2 decades blaming women like you for her death, but watching Emma walk again, I realize I've been punishing the wrong people. Maggie's throat tightened. I accept your apology. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. You were right. About everything. 6 months later, on a cold January day, Margaret Sullivan married Jacob Brennan in a ceremony on the ranch. Emma walked down the aisle without her cane carrying flowers. Maggie was 3 months pregnant. The entire town attended, even Constance Whitmore. Judge Aldrich conducted the ceremony. After the vows, after the kiss, after the applause, Jake pulled Maggie aside. I found the silver vein last week. It's bigger than we thought. We're rich, Maggie, really rich. Maggie laughed. That's nice, but I married you when I thought you were broke. The silver is just a bonus. I love you. I love you too. Emma appeared grinning. Can we cut the cake now? I helped Maggie make it, and I want everyone to see. They cut the cake, danced, celebrated, and as the sun set over Wyoming mountains, turning the sky gold and pink and purple, Maggie Sullivan Brennan stood surrounded by family and realized something profound. She'd spent 3 years believing she was worthless, believing the town's judgment defined her, believing she'd never be anything more than the fat widow everyone pitied. But she'd been wrong. She was a healer, a fighter, a wife, a mother, and soon a mother of 2. Worth wasn't given by others. It was claimed, earned, fought for, and she'd fought for every inch of this happiness. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular, or maybe to Thomas watching from wherever the dead went, or to William Henderson, or to all the soldiers she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. "Thank you for teaching me I was worth saving too." Jake's arm came around her waist. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Brennan." Maggie leaned into him, watching Emma dance with Sam Tucker, watching the town that had rejected her now celebrate her, watching the life she'd built from ashes and determination. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They went home, to the ranch that would stay theirs, to the daughter who walked and laughed and lived, to the future they'd fought so hard to claim. And in Silver Creek, Wyoming territory, on a October evening in 1879, everyone learned an important lesson. Sometimes the people society overlooks are exactly the ones who change everything. Sometimes the broken are the ones who heal. And sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love wins.